Hello and welcome to our program Newsroom. I'm Sharmeen Ali. Over the weekend, we saw a fresh resumption of peace talks between the United States and the Taliban at Doha. And these peace talks are being led by Zalmay Khalilzad from the United States and by Mullah Baradar from the Taliban side. So we'll be talking about that in today's program because these are very welcome developments for the entire region, and there was a lot of tension concerning when these peace talks would progress and how they're going to be going forward. So we'll be discussing that in today's program. Also, a new report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute says that global arms sales have gone up by 5%, with the United States leading in these arms sales where they have a market share of 59%, followed by Russia, the United Kingdom and France. So we'll be talking about this as well. And also we're going to be speaking about how a chef in New York City, Max Lamana, has said that his work is aimed towards reduction of food waste. And he says that 820 million people do not have adequate amounts of food to eat in the world. And at the same time, a large portion of food is being wasted all around the world, and how can we curb that? And as we see in Pakistan also, there's a malnutrition problem, and there's food deficiency issues with stunting, etc. And there are many countries in the world like that where those issues are present. So how can we reduce our wastage and make sure that food gets to the appropriate places and land is used properly and excessive amounts of food production don't take place where it's going to be wasted? We'll be talking about that as well on our program. And at the end of the program, we'll also talk about the latest developments in the stock market. So let's begin with our guests in our studio today. We have with us Ambassador Asif Durrani, who is an international relations expert. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us in the program.
Thank you for having me.
Sir, a very welcome development over the weekend. The peace talks with the Taliban and the United States have begun again in Doha. And now the main aim seems to be that the United States is hoping for a ceasefire with the Taliban before proceeding with further negotiations.
Yeah, you're right. It's a welcome development after 3 months of suspended talks. But behind the scene, many efforts were done to resume the talks, and that also included some CBMs, including release of 2 professors, one American, one Australian.
Yeah.
And then the Afghan side released Anas Haqqani and a couple of other Afghan detainees. So yes, it was resumed. When you talk about the ceasefire, it is already on the agenda. They were having 4-point agenda. First was withdrawal of the American troops, and second was Taliban's assurances that Afghanistan soil would not be used for terrorism purposes, and third was ceasefire, and fourth was intra-Afghan dialogue. So on first 2, i.e. withdrawal of the American troops and Taliban's assurances, they had almost reached an agreement. But the later 2 on ceasefire and intra-Afghan dialogue, there was a stalemate, and for various reasons. Yes, American priority is that Taliban should go for the ceasefire, but Taliban think that while they can, they may not hit the American or NATO troops, but when it comes to Afghans and other groups who may be attacking them or who may be perhaps continuing this war, they cannot guarantee. And also on intra-Afghan dialogue, there's a stalemate, sort of stalemate, because Ashraf Ghani government, after the 28 September elections, there are controversies about the results of the elections. So those results are not out yet. And so that has caused a lot of, controversy between those who contested the elections, especially the close rival, Dr. Abdullah, who has been a CEO, and in the previous dispensation, he was, in fact, brought in along with President Ashraf Ghani in a deal brokered by
the United States.
So John Kelly, he in fact brokered that deal. So this time Americans thought that if elections are held, so perhaps Ashraf Ghani government would be in a stronger position in the intra-Afghan dialogue.
Okay.
So now there's a big question mark that whether the Ashraf Ghani government or people around him as well as other stakeholders in Afghanistan, they would be talking from a position of strength or not.
Okay.
Because Taliban are taken as a monolith or as a big stakeholder, and they are, almost 50% area of the country they control, which has been acknowledged by the Americans and others.
Right.
Another 20% is contested. So almost 70% of the country, while Americans are still there,
Right. Okay.
is under the Taliban control or influence.
Right.
So this is a situation where Americans will have to tread very carefully, which they are. That's why they put a hold in September, because someone might have told him, President Trump, that you are in a rush, and the later two parts where they have to have ceasefire and intra-Afghan dialogue. I think some movement has taken place.
Right. You mentioned earlier when the talks had stopped, and that's partly because, okay, President Trump said it was the idea was that the U.S. soldier had been killed in an attack, but also we know that John Bolton, who was the defense secretary, he was also sort of, after he was sacked, he was sort of resisting this peace deal. After he was sacked, then the talks resumed. So there was opposition in the U.S. administration as well to these.
It was just not John Bolton, whose brief against Iran was more intense than on Afghanistan, but Secretary of State Pompeo as well as CIA, they wanted to have a niche in Afghanistan once the U.S. troops are withdrawn. But there is also a section in the U.S. establishment which wants that their troops should stay.
Right.
And at least 4 of their bases should be in the control of the U.S.
Right.
That's why the figure of 8,600 residual American forces are being talked about.
Right.
That even after withdrawal.
Okay.
But yes.
Sorry, we've got online with us right now Mr. Hassan Khan, who's an expert on Afghan affairs. Thank you so much for joining us online, Mr. Hassan Khan.
Thank you very much.
Okay, with these recent developments that have taken place with the resumption of peace talks in Doha between the Taliban and the United States, we know that Pakistan has played quite a large role, number one, by the release of Mullah Baradar earlier, and then now he's leading the peace talks and also in the negotiations with the prisoner release, etc. So what does this mean for Pakistan's relation going forward, relations with Afghanistan and, with the United States as well?
I think you are right that Pakistan is playing a very positive role in it is being encouraged by the other countries, particularly the U.S. And once the Afghan government also talked about the Pakistan's positive role in the peace process. But unfortunately, as for Pakistan-Afghanistan relations are concerned, so far at the moment they are not. We can't say that they are cordial and the contacts are positive. So these things happening, especially the Pakistan embassy, when the embassy officials were attacked, were targeted, and the Kashmir Days procession, the event was, I think that was also hijacked by the Afghan, we call it the demonstrators, but definitely some people were behind that. And so with the U.S., no doubt, Pakistan has been very close nowadays, particularly on the Afghan issue. And both are not only in regular contact, I think they are also sharing their development. You know that whenever Zalmay Khalilzad, whether he is going to the talks or he is finishing the round, so definitely he take a visit of Pakistan and he shared the details, or definitely the progress if there is with the Pakistani official. So Pakistan role so far, I think it is very good, because historically Pakistan was most of the time too much involved even internally in the Afghan affairs. But this time Pakistan has kept distance, and I think this is a very positive distance. It is only playing its role, which is being demanded by the international community, and that is to bring the Taliban leadership to the negotiating table. So far, I think Pakistan is no doubt it is on a positive side of the international community.
Right, and this is amidst the existing strained relations between, the diplomatic relations have been strained between Pakistan and Afghanistan, with the consulate in Kabul being closed, and then the one in Peshawar, Afghan consulate in Peshawar being closed, and the whole dispute over the Afghan market, etc. And now these peace talks have resumed. So how does that fare for improving the diplomatic relations between the two countries?
I think Pakistan has to be very careful, particularly while dealing with the Afghans affair. Afghans are very much, I think, they're very much suspicious about the Pakistan. It's not only the Afghan the administration, but some political leaders, including the jihadi commanders and some influential people. They mostly in Afghanistan. They do the politics on the Pakistan's issue. Whenever there is anything happen in Afghanistan, now they are not publicly saying it, but internally they are talking about the Pakistan's role in it, and so much so when recently a Japanese philanthropist Tetsuo Nakamura. When he was assassinated in Jalalabad, so I saw some posts on the social media that they were so I will use the word obnoxious, that they were accusing Pakistan for that also. So I think, unfortunately, it's turned out to be a fashion in Afghanistan to accuse Pakistan or put blame on Pakistan for anything happening there. Basically, the Afghans have this problem that none of the Afghan leadership, whether there's jihadi commanders or the political leadership or the ethnic leaders, none of them is agreed to take any responsibility for the current quagmire or for the 40 years war, the conflict in Afghanistan. They put all the blames on other, and Pakistan is an easiest, I think, is a sandbag for them. So they put every blame on Pakistan. So for Pakistan, I think for our diplomat, they have to walk a very tight rope while dealing with Afghanistan. But the fact is that a peaceful Afghanistan is in the interest of Pakistan, because if Pakistan wants to have its 2,000 plus kilometer border, the western border, to be secured and off the militants or the extremist element. So for that, it has to ensure that Afghanistan has a stable government, stable administration, and they have a good, reasonable contact with the Pakistani establishment. If not very cordial, at least they are on the talking terms. The line of communication must be kept. I think they must be kept intact. So that is the Pakistan big challenge to have good relation. But Sharmeen, historically, if you look at the Pakistan-Afghanistan relation for the last 70 years, so I never saw the relation to be very cordial or very, very friendly. But business to business, I think they were having that business type of relation, but never very cordial. Though we say we are brotherly countries, though we say that Pakistan has played a big role in the Afghan jihad, or keeping the millions of Afghans in Pakistan as refugees. That is one side of the one aspect of the issue. But Afghans in Pakistan, Islamabad and Kabul have never been on a very friendly, or what you call it, a cordial relation. So Pakistan has to keep it, to carry it on. I will suggest that. And the rest, that is for the Pakistani diplomat, that how they handle this issue, keeping in view the huge trust deficit and a lot of suspicion existed between the two countries. So that is a challenge, I will say.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Hassan Khan. So, Ambassador Durrani, you heard the conversation we were just having with Mr. Hassan Khan, who's an Afghan expert. Now, we were talking about how Pakistan and Afghanistan have had very strained relations throughout, basically, that's what he was saying. And despite this, we're trying to facilitate this whole peace process with the United States and the Taliban. Your comments on this?
Well, I tend to agree with Hassan Khan, no doubt. Most part of it. Yes, we have had a strained relationship, but at the same time, we should also understand that apart from this Afghan mindset, which started right from the very beginning, but at the same time, Afghans have also been very sensitive to our sensibilities. So therefore, you will not find Afghans supporting Indian position on Kashmir. Otherwise, they have been. So, and then we should also be mindful of the fact that during 65 and 71 wars, former King Zahir Shah.
We have to go to a break. Viewers, please stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. Let's continue our discussion with Ambassador Durrani about the peace talks that are going on again between the Taliban and the United States. So we were just talking about the relations, how they've been, there's been a bit of a trust deficit between Afghanistan and Pakistan. However, sir, now one of the main factors in this whole peace process is the Afghan people. They faced, since 2001, since the US invasion of Afghanistan, they faced 29,000 civilian deaths and 31,000 injuries among civilians, and a total of 111,000 Afghans, including the militants and soldiers and civilians, have been killed. They have faced the brunt of this war. And as you were saying earlier, the Afghan society is such that they've been at war for decades now, you know, before the US invasion as well.
4 decades now.
Exactly. And their children have grown up and they've, you know, in a war environment. And they're also a tribal society that also kind of has conflicts within itself as well. So all of this will have to be contained in some kind of an umbrella afterwards, after these peace talks take place.
You're right, because big challenges will be facing the Afghan stakeholders, whosoever comes into power. And but first step is the resumption of talks between the United States and the Taliban. And subsequently, then I think all stakeholders in Afghanistan, including Taliban and others, they'll have to sit and sort out their problems.
Right.
The reason is that so far they have not seriously discussed those problems. At least people don't know. And then how they are going to give confidence to the people that something good is being discussed and their future will be secured and peace will return to the country.
Right.
And as you rightly pointed out, that in the past 4 decades, 2 generations have, you know, they're born and brought up, and now they are part of that that society which has been destroyed. So it is a huge, humongous task ahead, and good sense should prevail, and every effort should be made to bring in peace, and this is in the hands of Afghans themselves.
Exactly. Sir, previously when the Taliban were in charge of the country, like you said, 50% plus is under the control of the Taliban. Previously, we saw that their laws were very draconian, and in this case, do you think that the Taliban has evolved and will include, say, civil society and the flourishing of art and sports and women's education and things like that, which were a problem before?
It's a very good question. The issue is that if we look at their previous record, then it is something not encouraging. Before 9/11, how they had behaved. But at the same time, if you look at their recent interaction with the media and the people, they have been admitting their mistakes in the past, one. And secondly, they are also claiming that they will be different and they have learned from their mistakes. Hopefully they have. But with regard to women's rights, they have been interacting with the Afghan women in Moscow conclave as well as in Doha. And but their assurances to the women was that women's rights would be secured according to the injunctions of Islam.
Okay.
Now it's an open-ended assurance, but at the same time, it needs some amount of explanation, because when you talk about injunctions of Islam, then people living in Bosnia, or they are living in Pakistan, or they are living in Morocco or elsewhere, the Muslims, they are also Muslims.
Right. So it's open to societal
So
interpretation.
yes,
Right.
so it is. Its interpretation would be a big task, and then this is the major worry for the people in Afghanistan.
Right.
That
So that's yet to be seen.
almost 4 million girls are
Right.
going to school.
Yeah. So
What
let's
will
see how
happen?
that. Let's see
So
how that
this
all
is,
works out.
and hopefully the good sense would prevail.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Durrani, for joining us on our program.
Thank you for having me.
Now we're going to discuss another very interesting development, how a research institute, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, has released a report saying how global arms sales have gone up by 5%. Let's speak to somebody from this institute. We have with us online Mr. Siemon Wezeman. Thank you so much for joining us, Siemon.
Yes, good evening.
So can you please tell us a little bit about this report of yours? This is now a market that we're seeing is dominated by the United States. 59% of all arms sales are from the United States. Where exactly are these arms going?
So what we're looking at is the largest companies and their arms sales. And yes, 59% of that, of those companies, of those sales are in the U.S. So U.S. companies doing it. Most of those sales are actually to the U.S. U.S. companies are not extremely big exporters as part of their total sales. They're big exporters, but as part of their total sales, it's not so terribly important. So it's for the U.S. market is the main one. Of course, there are some important export markets from where U.S. companies profit. Then you get European companies, which have a slightly different profile. The European market is large, but European companies generally generate more of their revenue outside of their own country than U.S. companies. So they are more dependent on exports.
Okay. So for the US, you're saying that it's mostly internal sales within the country, and for for Europe, it's also exports. And
Yes.
also, the data for China is not exactly clear, because the top producers are the USA, followed by Russia, which is 8.6%, United Kingdom 8.4%, and France 5.5%. So what would the data look like for China?
Well, we don't include the Chinese companies because we just don't have enough information from them. Some companies just don't provide any information about their arms sales, and others give ad hoc information, so we don't have a sequence of years to look at. But from the indications that we see, and just also knowing that the Chinese defense budget is very high and mostly it's spent on Chinese weapons, several Chinese companies will belong to the top 100. Some actually really high up. Companies like Rafique, the aircraft company, would probably be somewhere in the top 10. Just knowing what they produce, the number of aircraft they churn out, they would certainly belong there. But we just don't know the exact figures.
Right, okay. And from your research, which country is the one that's importing the highest number of arms?
But that's a different set of data. But looking at imports, it's Saudi Arabia and India are at this moment the biggest importers of weapons. Saudi Arabia, big appetite for weapons and no arms industry to speak of. And India, also a big appetite for weapons. It has an arms industry, as you noted in the information we provided. There are 3 Indian companies in the top 100, but the arms industry is by far not capable enough to produce for the demands of the Indian Armed Forces.
Right. Okay, and this increase in sales that we're seeing of arms, now where do these arms mostly end up? Is this in conflict zones, or is there any watchdog for this? Where are these arms ending up, and what are they being used for?
There is no real official watchdog or so. As I said, the U.S. is buying mostly for its own armed forces, so the sales are mostly to the U.S. But of course, the U.S. uses those weapons in different places in the world, also in conflict, in Syria, for example, in Afghanistan. European companies a bit less, some of their weapons are being used in Syria and Afghanistan. And the weapons that they sell to other countries are heavily used in several conflicts or in areas where there are high tensions. Middle East, several places in Asia, where big arms importers buy from European countries, buy from the US, buy from Russia. Those weapons are there, and yes, they do to some extent fuel the conflict, fuel the tensions. Doesn't make it better. The world hasn't become safer in the last years. You see that from the arms, from the military spending, which is increasing basically everywhere in the world. You see it from the number of conflicts that are going on, and you see it also from arms sales and arms imports, all increasing and clearly indicating that the world hasn't become safer.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us online, Mr. Siemon Wezeman. Now we have with us in our studios Ms. Lubna Khan Faraz. We're going to be talking about this topic which we had mentioned earlier about food wastage. Food wastage is a very big phenomenon all over the world, and particularly in countries like Pakistan and developing countries, there are a lot of people under the poverty line who are not getting enough nutrition, and they're not getting the proper food supply. And at the same time, food is also being wasted by other members of society who are more affluent. So we're going to talk about how to prevent this and how to improve this situation with Ms. Lubna. Thank you so much for joining us on our program.
Thank you so much for having me. So happy to be here. And this is actually such a big issue in society right now, and actually in the world. And it's not just Pakistan, I'll tell you that. It's pretty much all across the world. And countries, especially like, in places in North America that are abundant in so many resources, people just aren't aware how to make use of the food that they have on their plate in order to avoid the waste.
Right, exactly. Right? Now we have the celebrity chef, Max Lamana, who's made it his mission to sort of educate people about this issue and how food is wasted, and then how you can curb this wastage of food. So, Lubna, you're a dietitian and food expert. So, can you please tell us your views about how to curb this wastage of food in a developing country like Pakistan, where you have these nutritional deficiencies in small children, and you have stunting, the children have stunted growth. And also I visited some Kachi Abadi schools, where squatter schools, where the children were sort of scavengers, and then they put them into schools, street children schools actually. The director was saying to me that if we just had enough funds to provide the children with one banana and a glass of milk per week, it will help significantly for their nutrition. And it was just shocking to see the abundance that some families have. And here you have children who can't afford a glass of milk and a banana in a week. So this is the disparity you have. So what is your opinion on this?
It's actually unbelievable, and this is a reality that everybody really needs to open their eyes to, right? There's many practical ways on how to avoid food wastage, and one of them that I actually tell everyone to do is like shop smart. We have a tendency to overbuy everything that's in the market, and unfortunately in the culture that we live in, and the privileges that we have with the whole restaurant culture and all of that, we're just so used to being over-serving what we're actually supposed to eat. And when we're doing that, you're actually never going to finish what's on your plate. And when you're doing that, that means you're not shopping smart. Things are going bad in your kitchen. You're not looking at the expiry dates. One of the main things that I have an issue with when I'm doing my consultations with people are just not aware on where and how to store the food.
Yes, that's
right?
very true.
So what are you actually supposed to put in the fridge? I see people putting in onions in the fridge when they're going to go bad, right? So you really have to educate yourself in where to store your food. So potatoes and onions, they go in the pantry. You don't have to put them in the fridge, and they stay away from each other. You don't need to put tomatoes in the fridge either. You can just store them, in a cool, dry place. These things can help, help stop, making the food go bad at a very fast rate, and then you're not going to eat it. Another important thing that I tell people to do is start freezing your food, right? So when your food is ripening and it's about to go bad like the next 2 or 3 days, you just cut it up and freeze it. It helps you food prep, which is a really big deal these days. If you want to become a healthy person, you're always going to plan your meals out, right? So prep your meals and, cut them up, freeze them. You're more likely to use them if they're ready for you to use, rather than, oh my God, I have to go home, I have to cut all the vegetables, and I have to cut all of these things. Have them ready to use.
And that's a healthier way of living as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, when a lot of this food is thrown away, it ends up in landfills. And this is what, this chef Max Lamana was saying, that landfill then releases methane gas, and that contributes to the climate change, greenhouse gases, etc. So what are the alternatives? For example, recycling is so useful when you dispose of your organic waste in such a manner that it can be recycled and it can be used for composting, etc.
You know, one of the great things that I love about Pakistan is that I see almost every household that has, like, you know, privileged spaces, they're growing a little bit of their own vegetables, right? And I see herbs, or I see something that they're, you know, growing. So you can always, and this is what I do at my home as well, is that, you know, you can use your food waste and make a better fertilizer. And start, you know, using your food compost for that. So, you know, and another thing you can do is, like, say all those peels or chicken skin and bones and all of that, you can make stock. Instead of buying those, you know, those little tablets or those little chicken things, flavorings, you can make your own stock. And I'm telling you, they're much more flavorful and more abundant in nutrition form when you're using that. That's in turn going to help you at least reduce your own carbon footprint, right? So it starts with yourself. You know, all of these things that we talk about, these are such huge issues that we cannot tackle in just one day. It starts with yourself in your own home. What are we doing wrong?
A lot of people in Islamabad have started making rooftop gardens for growing vegetables, because there's so many flat rooftops in Islamabad. So, and I'm sure it's the same all across Pakistan. That space can be utilized with flower pots.
Utilize your gardens. Even you can just dedicate a small area. And herbs, they are like, you know, you can use small pots to grow them. You don't need a huge garden, or you don't even need a rooftop for that, right? You just need a small pot to grow your own coriander or anything like that. It's very easy. It's all about self-education. If you have, you know, access to it, I always say learn. You know, and I always see, this is another issue that I see with people, like, you know, in our era, is that food is now termed ugly. So when you go food shopping or grocery shopping, I see a lot of people, like, you know, picking through their apples or picking through their bananas because, oh, this banana is ugly, so I'm not going to buy it. It has to be perfectly, you know, beautiful. That in turn is creating such a huge amount of food waste. This is actually a really great thing that I saw.
Because the perfect fruits and vegetables are not necessarily organic.
Exactly.
Right? So the organic ones are not going to be beautiful anyway.
100%. And you know, this is a tactic that I don't know if we can employ over here in Pakistan, but I think it would be greatly beneficial. I saw a lot of big grocery stores doing this, is that offering these so-called ugly foods at a discounted rate, just to make sure that people do end up buying them, because there's nothing wrong with them. Right? It's just that maybe they're not perfectly round, or they're not perfectly colored, but they're still food. And there are people, like you said, that don't even have access to, say, a glass of milk or a banana.
There's a huge disparity. I don't think in such a situation and in such a country, anybody should be wasting food. 100%. You have to look around and see where it's needed. Thank you so much, Lubna Khan, for joining us on this program today. Thank you for joining us on today's program. That's all the time we have today. We'll see you next time on Newsroom. That's bye-bye from me, Sharmeen Ali, and from our team.
Because there has been much of the strong presence and understanding by the Western governments that the flow of the people needs to be monitored and looked very carefully.
Exactly, because some of the Afghan officials think that more foreign fighters, they are saying, are slowly arriving in Afghanistan, and they're saying that their concerns are that Afghanistan will, the Islamic State will try and make it, Afghanistan, the group's global hub in the coming years.
I don't see that, because I think Afghanistan is losing that ground. The Islamic State is losing that ground, because the world has seen, especially the people in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and this entire Central Asian states, they have seen this position that neither the Taliban emerged as a global leader for the Muslims, nor the Al-Qaeda, nor the Islamic State. So these armed groups, they are no more solution for having, because they're going to go for state building. You actually have a state building, and for this you need to have elected people who are being recognized as per international law and as per UN Charter by the global powers. So I think such kind of non-state actors, they don't have a future, and world have understood, and the peak of Islamic State in Iraq and Syria have seen that there has been no solution, and still the state actors are more powerful, and and the sovereignty is more important idea as compared to having this transnational Islamic terrorist organizations, because they have brought a bad image and bad name to the name
Okay,
of
so
religion.
let me ask you this. What is the threat to this region, to South Asia, to Pakistan, including Afghanistan, from ISIS?
I personally believe that there is no threat. There could be sleeping cells. There could be lone wolf phenomenon. We can understand that there is a possibility of that. But an organized group targeting the state installations, targeting the people, there is no choice. Especially in Pakistan, there is no way that Islamic State can prop up, or they can influence, or they can damage the state property, state institutions, or the masses. But definitely, as I mentioned, there definitely the ideological presence is there. This is where things move on, because people get motivated to these ideas. People believe that the Muslims are not getting a fair deal in Palestine, in Kashmir. So we need to pick up guns. And I think, but this particular idea is losing the ground, because earlier such movements, even be it in Central Asia, be it in Malaysia, Indonesia, in Middle East, here in this part of the world, and especially in last these 17, 18 years, they have not got any particular conclusion. So there are very less chances they will survive whatever elements are left now.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kamarchima, for
Thank you.
joining us on the program today. Now we're going to speak a little bit about the movements in the stock market, which has been very interesting lately. We have with us online Mr. Faisal Fateh. Thank you so much for joining us, Faisal Fateh, again.
Thank you for taking me.
Can you please now bring us current about how did the stock market do today, and then we can talk about the recent trends as well.
Sure. Today it was up by almost 1.2%. It was a bit rocky and choppy from when it started. But we are seeing again and again that whenever the market is taking a bit of a dip, like it did yesterday, the next day we see a lot of interest, and people are, I think, getting bored about taking their positions and